Hello everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Jasmine and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Seattle about 2 years ago. It was one of those casual gatherings where you show up, have a few drinks, maybe share a few laughs, and then head home without expecting to meet anyone significant. But she caught my attention that night. When our friend introduced us, the conversation flowed easily. We talked for most of the night, discovering we had similar tastes in many things, and shared a slightly cynical sense of humor about modern dating. We exchanged numbers before leaving, and I texted her the next day. We went on our first date the following weekend, coffee that turned into lunch, which turned into hours of walking around the city, just talking. It felt natural in a way that dating rarely does. I was 28 at the time, working for a mid-sized tech company in downtown Seattle. The job was demanding but rewarding, with good pay and a reasonable work-life balance. Jasmine was 27, working for a retail company. She handled their social media presence and campaign coordination. We dated casually for the first few months, both of us taking it slow after previous relationships that had moved too fast and burned out. But by month 4 or 5, we were seeing each other multiple times a week. By month 6, we'd met each other's families. By month 8, it was clear this was serious. I owned a 2-bedroom house in a residential neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown. I had been leasing it for 2 years before meeting Jasmine. It was more space than I needed as a single person, but I wanted the extra room because I work at home sometimes. Jasmine had been renting a 1-bedroom apartment closer to the city center. Her rent kept increasing every year, standard Seattle landlord behavior, and she'd mentioned a few times that she was getting priced out of her neighborhood. After we'd been together for 8 months, I suggested she move in with me. It made sense practically and financially. I had the space. She'd save significantly on rent. We were spending most nights together anyway, just alternating between her place and mine. Moving in would simplify things. But more than the practical reasons, I wanted her there. I wanted to come home to her every day. She said yes without much hesitation. We spent a weekend moving her belongings, and just like that, we were living together. That was about 8 months ago. Our relationship had been stable for about a year and 4 months total now. 8 months living together, 8 months before that, dating while living separately. Living together had been easier than I'd expected. We fell into a comfortable routine. I'd make coffee in the morning while she got ready for work. She'd usually cook dinner since she got home before me and actually enjoyed cooking. We'd split household chores without too much negotiation. She'd do laundry, I'd handle dishes and trash. We'd watch shows together in the evening or sometimes just exist in parallel in different rooms doing our own things. We had disagreements, of course. Nobody lives with another person without some friction. She'd get annoyed when I left my work stuff spread across the house. I'd get frustrated when she'd invite friends over without much notice. Small things that we talk through or just let go. Nothing ever felt serious enough to threaten the relationship. We talked about the future regularly. Not in an intense, pressure-filled way, but naturally. What kind of wedding do we each want? Whether we saw ourselves staying in Seattle long-term. How many kids might we want someday? General life trajectory, stuff that couples discuss when they're planning to stay together. I'd started thinking seriously about proposing as the days go by. I began researching engagement rings, checking out styles I thought she'd like, and figuring out what I could afford while still getting something meaningful. I'd talk to her sister subtly to get a sense of what Jasmine might want. I'd even started scouting potential proposal locations, places that meant something to us as a couple. Jasmine knew I planned to marry her eventually. We talked about it openly enough that it wasn't a question of if, just when. But she didn't know I was actively planning it or how soon I was thinking. I was waiting for the right moment. Wanted it to feel natural and special, not rushed or forced. Living together had generally made our relationship stronger. There's something about the daily mundane existence with someone that either confirms you're compatible or exposes that you're not. For us, it had mostly confirmed compatibility. Sure, we had our moments. Times when one of us was in a bad mood and the other had to give space. Mornings when we were both running late and got in each other's way. Occasional disagreements about things. But nothing felt unsolvable. Nothing made me question whether this was the right person. Until one specific Wednesday evening. I'd had a particularly brutal day at work. One of our main systems had crashed in the morning, affecting multiple clients. I'd spent the entire day troubleshooting with my team, trying to identify the source of the problem and implement fixes. Lots of stress, lots of pressure from management, lots of frustrated clients calling for updates. By the time I left the office around 7, 2 hours later than usual, I was completely drained and mentally exhausted. I drove home on autopilot, just wanting to shower, eat something simple, and decompress by going to bed early. When I pulled into my driveway and walked up to the front door, I could hear laughter before I even got the key in the lock. I opened the door and immediately understood. Jasmine was in the living room with 2 of her friends. I'd met them both several times. They worked with Jasmine and often went out together for happy hours or weekend brunches. The 3 of them were sprawled across the couch and chairs, snacks and drinks covering the coffee table. Music was playing from Jasmine's phone. They were clearly in the middle of some story or joke, all of them laughing. Jasmine looked up when I walked in, her face bright and happy. She called out cheerfully, "Hey, babe." Her friends both waved and said hi. I returned the greeting politely, managing a tired smile. I genuinely liked Jasmine's friends and didn't mind them being there normally. But at that specific moment, after that specific day, I really just wanted quiet. I headed toward the bedroom, planning to change out of my work clothes and figure out dinner. As I was walking down the hallway, Jasmine called out loudly enough that I was clearly supposed to hear, "Oh, by the way, I'll be going on a weekend getaway." I stopped mid-step, turned around slowly, trying to process what she just said. I walked back to where I could see the living room, still holding my work bag. I looked at Jasmine with what must have been obvious confusion. I asked, keeping my voice level, who she was going with. She responded quickly, almost dismissively, that she was going with friends. Her tone was casual, like she was mentioning she'd be running to the grocery store, not announcing a multi-day trip. She didn't make eye contact, instead looking at her phone as she answered. I felt displeasure wash over me. Not anger exactly, but definitely bothered. This was the first time I was hearing about any trip. We lived together. We shared a life. And she was announcing she'd be leaving for a weekend in front of her friends, like it was an afterthought she almost forgot to mention. I noticed her friends had gone suddenly quiet. They'd been laughing and talking constantly since I walked in. Now they were both looking at their phones, while suddenly very interested in the snacks on the table. The vibe in the room had shifted completely. That awkward silence when everyone knows something tense is happening, but nobody wants to acknowledge it. I looked at Jasmine and said, more firmly than before, that we should talk about this privately. She hesitated, glanced at her friends like she were reluctant to leave them, sighed heavily, and stood up. She followed me toward the bedroom, her body language already defensive. We walked into the bedroom, and I closed the door behind us. I was still holding my work bag, set it down by the dresser. Jasmine leaned against the opposite dresser, phone still in her hand, making it clear through her posture that she didn't think this conversation was necessary. I asked directly what this getaway was about. She told me it was just a trip, that I should relax. Said she needed a break. I asked what she needed a break from. Pointed out that she'd never mentioned planning anything, and this was the first I was hearing about it. She shrugged, said it was just a weekend. Didn't think it needed a whole discussion. I tried to explain calmly how announcing it in front of her friends, with me finding out that way, felt disrespectful, like I was being informed rather than included. She sighed and said not everything was that deep, accused me of overthinking it. I maintained my calm tone, but pushed back. Told her I wasn't overthinking. I was trying to understand why my girlfriend was suddenly announcing she'd be leaving for the weekend, and I had to find out about it with an audience in our living room. That's when she got more defensive. Her voice got sharper. She said I was making it sound like she needed permission, then added almost accusingly, "We're not married." I paused at that comment. Felt it land differently than maybe she'd intended. I clarified that I never said she needed permission. I just expected some respect, some basic communication, the courtesy of being told about plans before they were announced to other people. She shrugged again, a gesture that was starting to really irritate me. Her tone went from defensive to cutting. She said, "Then stop acting like we're married. You don't get a say in what I do." Those words hung in the air between us. I stared at her, feeling something shift fundamentally in how I saw this moment and this relationship. This wasn't the first time she'd made comments like this. There'd been other occasions, smaller ones that I'd brushed off or not fully registered. Times when she'd minimize our relationship or make me feel like I was overstepping by having opinions about our shared life. But this one landed differently. Maybe because I was tired. Maybe because it was so blatant. Maybe because she'd said it after dismissing my very reasonable concern about communication. I looked at her calmly and said quietly, "You're right. We're not married." She frowned, clearly expecting me to argue back or get defensive, to escalate the argument. That's probably what she was prepared for. Instead, I just dropped my work bag where I stood, started taking off my work clothes to change, walked into the bathroom without another word. No yelling. No further statements. Just quiet acceptance of what she'd said. I closed the bathroom door and stood under the shower for a long time, letting hot water wash over me while I processed what had just happened. Her words kept replaying. The dismissiveness. The way she'd framed having a say in our shared life as me overstepping. The implication was that because we weren't married, I had no grounds to expect basic respect or communication. When I came out of the shower, she was gone from the bedroom. I could hear her back in the living room with her friends like nothing had happened. I got dressed in comfortable clothes, went to the kitchen, and made myself a simple dinner. Ate alone at the kitchen table while they continued socializing in the living room. She didn't come to check on me or suggest we finish our conversation. I went to bed early, around 9:30. Just wanted the day to end. Jasmine stayed up with her friends for a while longer. I figured they left while I was asleep. She came to bed sometime after that, but we didn't speak. She got on her side, I stayed on mine, and we slept without touching or talking. The next morning was Friday. We both got ready for work in silence. The tension from the night before is still hanging over everything. I made coffee, poured myself a cup, and didn't offer her one. She made her own. We moved around the kitchen like choreographed dancers, avoiding contact. I left for work before she did, grabbed my keys, said a brief, "See you later," without looking at her, and walked out. At work, I couldn't fully concentrate. My mind kept going back to the conversation, to her words, to the broader pattern I was now seeing clearly. Around lunchtime, I made a decision. I went through the rest of my work day on autopilot, handling tasks mechanically while a plan formed in my mind. I left the office right at 5, which was earlier than I'd been able to leave all week. Drove straight home. The house was empty when I walked in, completely quiet. No sign of Jasmine. I walked through the rooms and noticed some of her things were missing. Her weekend bag, some toiletries from the bathroom, a few outfits from a closet she'd left for her getaway. I pulled out my phone and searched for locksmith services in the area. Found one with good reviews and same-day availability. Called them. The locksmith could come within 2 hours. I confirmed the appointment. While I waited, I started gathering Jasmine's belongings. I did it methodically and carefully. This wasn't about being vindictive or destructive. It was about being decisive and final. I went through the closet and folded all her clothes. Wrapped her shoes in tissue paper so they wouldn't get scuffed. Collected all her toiletries and cosmetics from the bathroom and packed them in boxes. Gathered her books from the shelves, her decorative items from around the house, her kitchen gadgets. Everything that belonged to her, I collected and packed properly. The locksmith arrived around 7:30. Professional guy, probably mid-40s, didn't ask questions. Just did his job efficiently. He changed the locks on the front door, the back door, and the side entrance. Took about 90 minutes total. I paid him, got my new keys, and he left. I went back to organizing Jasmine's things. placed all the packed bags and boxes near the front door, arranged neatly where she'd see them immediately. Then I took a piece of paper and wrote a simple note. "You're right. We're not married. So you don't owe me an explanation, and I don't owe you a home. Take care." I taped the note to the top of her largest bag where it would be impossible to miss. As I was finishing these arrangements, I heard a door open across the hall. My neighbor stepped out. She was in her 60s, a kind woman who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades. She saw me with Jasmine's bags and boxes by the door and asked gently if everything was all right. I explained simply and directly. Jasmine was moving out. Just wanted to let her know in case Jasmine came by while I wasn't home. The woman looked at the bags, then at me. Her expression was understanding without being pitying. She'd probably seen enough of life to recognize a breakup when she saw one. She just said, "Understood, dear," and went back inside her apartment. I finished arranging everything, went back inside my house, and locked the new locks behind me. I made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. Saturday and Sunday passed quietly. I caught up on household projects, went to the gym, and saw a friend for lunch on Sunday afternoon. I didn't think much about when Jasmine would return. Didn't stress about the confrontation that would inevitably come. I just existed in the calm of knowing I'd made my decision and acted on it. Sunday night, around 9 o'clock, I was sitting in the living room, reading, when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Then the unmistakable sound of a key trying to turn in a lock that it no longer fit. Confusion in the fumbling, trying again, and the key not working. Then knocking. Light at first, then more insistent. Jasmine began calling my name through the door. I sat in my living room, perfectly still, listening. I didn't move toward the door. I didn't respond either. I just sat there. The knocking continued, then became more frequent and more urgent. About 15 minutes passed this way. Then I heard my neighbor's door open. Her voice was kind and gentle as she spoke to Jasmine. I couldn't make out every word, but I could hear the gist. My neighbor was explaining that I'd changed the locks on Friday. As I had said, Jasmine had moved out. Silence from Jasmine for a moment. Then she said that couldn't be right in a higher-pitched, confused voice. I heard my neighbor's voice again, mentioning that I'd left Jasmine's things packed by the door. More silence. Then footsteps moving away from my door. I walked quietly to the peephole and looked out. Jasmine was standing by the bags and boxes I'd left. Her weekend bag in her hand was now set down next to everything else. She was staring at her belongings like she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. She bent down and saw the note, pulled it off the bag. "Read it." Even through the peephole, I could see her face change. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Inside, my phone lit up on the coffee table next to me. Her name lit up the screen. I looked at it, sent the call to voicemail without answering. She tried again immediately. Again, I sent it to voicemail. Through the peephole, I watched her try a third time. Same result. Her face crumpled as she realized I wasn't going to answer. She stood there in the hallway, staring at her phone, then at my door, then back at her phone. Tears started falling. Her shoulders shook. My neighbor's door opened again. She checked on Jasmine, asked if she had somewhere to go. I saw Jasmine nod, though I couldn't hear their conversation clearly through the door. My neighbor went back inside, leaving Jasmine alone in the hallway with all her belongings. I stepped away from the peephole and went back to the living room. Sat down with my book again, though I wasn't really reading anymore. For nearly an hour, I could hear her out there. Occasional movement. The sound of her trying to call again. Quiet crying. At one point, I heard her slide down to sit on the floor. I stayed where I was. After a while, I heard different sounds. A phone conversation. She must have called someone for a ride. Then, about 20 minutes later, footsteps in the hallway. Multiple trips back and forth. I went back to the peephole. A cab driver was helping her load her things. Box after box, bag after bag. It took several trips. Jasmine's face was blotchy and red, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked at my door one more time before getting into the cab, like she still couldn't quite believe this was happening. Then she was gone. I stood at the door for a moment longer, then went to bed. The next morning, Monday, I woke up to dozens of missed calls and text messages. All from Jasmine. The messages ranged wildly in tone. Some were angry, demanding to know how I could do this, accusing me of overreacting, saying I had no right to kick her out like that. Some were desperate, begging me to talk to her, saying we could work this out, pleading for another chance. Some tried to be rational, explaining that she didn't mean what she said, that she was just frustrated, that we should discuss this like adults. I read through them all. Didn't respond to any of them. I blocked her number before leaving for work. Throughout the day, my phone rang several times from unknown numbers. I recognized a pattern, her calling from other phones. I let them all go to voicemail. She tried texting from her friends' phones. I saw the messages come through. I didn't respond to any of them. By Wednesday, the contact attempts had slowed. Still, occasional calls from unknown numbers that I didn't answer, but the constant barrage had stopped. At work, a few coworkers asked how my weekend had been. I gave vague, pleasant answers. Didn't mention the breakup. It wasn't anyone's business, and I didn't feel like discussing it. The house felt different, too. I'd catch myself sometimes expecting to hear Jasmine's voice or picture her things scattered around. About 2 weeks after that Sunday night, I was organizing some paperwork when I came across the information I'd saved about engagement rings. Screenshots of designs. Notes about her ring size. Research on different jewelers and their pricing. I stared at it all for a long moment. Then I deleted everything. The ring I'd been planning to buy would have been a mistake. The proposal I'd been planning would have locked me into a marriage with someone who didn't respect me or our relationship. I dodged something massive without even fully realizing it at the time. Over the following weeks, as I settled into my newly single life, I started reflecting more deeply on what had happened. Jasmine's comment about not being married, that hadn't come from nowhere. It was revealing of how she viewed our relationship fundamentally. We'd been living together for 8 months, sharing a home, building a life, making plans for a future. I'd been ready to propose, thought we were partners working toward the same goals. But she'd been operating from a completely different framework. In her mind, the lack of a marriage certificate meant she didn't owe me certain considerations. Didn't need to communicate about her plans. Didn't need to factor in my feelings or perspectives. She wanted the benefits of living together, the nice house, the shared expenses that made life easier, the companionship when it was convenient, but without the responsibilities that come with actual partnership. And when I'd simply asked for basic respect and communication, she'd framed it as me being controlling, overstepping boundaries, and acting like we were married when we weren't. I'd been seeing marriage as a formalization of the commitment we already had. She'd been seeing the lack of marriage as an escape clause from full commitment. The pattern had been there before that night, I realized. Other moments I'd glossed over or rationalized. Times when she'd make plans without telling me until the last minute. Times when she'd dismiss my concerns as me being too sensitive. Times when she'd do exactly what she wanted and frame any pushback as me being unreasonable. I'd accommodated all of it, told myself I was being flexible and understanding that relationships require compromise and not sweating the small stuff. But what I'd actually been doing was accepting disrespect, training her that my feelings and concerns didn't really matter, that I'd always bend rather than hold a boundary. Her comment about not being married had just made all of that explicitly clear. And my response, changing the locks, packing her things, ending the relationship cleanly, and finally, had been the first real boundary I'd set in months. It felt harsh when I thought about it initially, extreme even. But the more time passed, the more I recognized it had been necessary. If I'd engaged with her after she came back by opening the door, letting her in, and having the conversation she wanted, what would have happened? She would have cried and apologized and said she didn't mean it. Would have explained that she said things she didn't really feel. Would have promised to be better about communication. And I probably would have believed her, or wanted to believe her. Would have let her move back in. And then what? We'd be right back in the same pattern within weeks or months. The same dynamic of her doing what she wanted and me accommodating it. The same disrespect disguised as her needing space or freedom. Maybe we'd have even gotten married. I'd have proposed, she'd have said yes, and we'd have locked ourselves into something much harder to leave. And then I'd be dealing with this same pattern, but with the added complexity of divorce instead of a simple breakup. Some people confuse freedom with disrespect. Think that being able to do what they want means they don't need to consider anyone else. That partnership is optional when it becomes inconvenient. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is let them go find what they think they're missing. Let them discover that freedom without respect is just loneliness with different packaging. That a partner who asks for basic consideration isn't controlling. They're just asking to be valued. I don't know what Jasmine learned from everything that happened. Maybe she came to understand the difference between healthy autonomy and disregard for your partner. Maybe she's in another relationship now, making the same mistakes. That's not my concern anymore. What I learned is what I'll take forward. That respect isn't negotiable in a relationship. That communication isn't an imposition. It's a foundation. That someone who views your reasonable expectations as overreach isn't someone you can build a life with. I learned that ending something decisively, even when it feels harsh, can be kinder in the long run than dragging out something that's fundamentally broken. I learned that I'd rather be alone than be with someone who makes me feel small for asking to be considered. And I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from someone who doesn't know how to love you properly. Dating will happen when it happens. Maybe I'll meet someone who understands partnership as mutual respect rather than restriction. Someone who sees communication as a connection rather than control. Or I'll be contentedly single for a while longer, enjoying the peace that comes from not accepting less than I deserve.